Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. As you might imagine, we are fully stocked on today's broadcast, plenty on Georgia and Alabama, including a little bit of love for the Dogs ahead of the game. Rat poison, maybe not quite that far, but at least some praise and some picks. Some folks thinking the Dogs are going to win. We'll start with that. Amarius Mims, five-star offensive tackle, decision day for him. Obviously, we'll be all over that. Returning guest today for the first time in a while, former Georgia quarterback David Greene going to be back with us. Mike Griffith as well. So it is a jam-packed next few minutes. We are so happy to have you a part of it. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. It begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Harrah's Cherokee Resort. Find us online at caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of the things that we said on yesterday's show was that, or at least we said it this week, these days start to run together after a while, that Georgia this week, the players that play in this game won't look across the sideline in Tuscaloosa against the Alabama Crimson Tide, and they won't see Alabama mystique. They may not even know much about Bear Bryant one way or another. I wasn't even alive when Bear Bryant was the Alabama coach, and I am far older than the players that will play in this game for Georgia here this year. Obviously, in the more recent times, Georgia has had some disappointing, heartbreaking losses to Alabama, and some Georgia fans, I guess, feel to a degree cursed by the way these games have ended, as I roll my eyes as I say that. But Georgia players themselves, listen, the news cycle in college football just spins so fast now that no one remembers 2017, no one remembers 2018. A lot of these Georgia players were young enough then, they weren't even maybe even I almost said they weren't allowed to stay up late enough to watch those games. The truth is, that's probably overstating matters a little bit. But the point is these players, the only sense of history they have is the history they've been a part of, and all they know is many of these guys, they had a choice of going to Georgia or Alabama. They chose UGA for a reason. On Saturday, I think many of them are looking forward to the chance to demonstrate why it was that Georgia was the better choice for them than Alabama. There is no Alabama mystique in the mind of many of these Georgia players, which makes this different than like some of the Georgia games that maybe have been played in the past. And for people like me who are a little bit older, I do think it's a difficult challenge to recalibrate yourself in your mind to the way that like the player who plays in this game views this game. For those of us who've lived through a lot of SEC lore, a lot of Georgia-Alabama games in the past, you know, I think there's something that's kind of a big deal about going to Tuscaloosa. I mean, I remember making that trip over to Tuscaloosa in 2002 for the Georgia game then, a win that turned out to be a big one for the Dogs. We'll actually talk live to David Greene, the quarterback in that game, later on today here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. But many of you remember the backstory, the storyline for that game against Alabama back in 2002. Pat Dye, legendary former Auburn coach, Georgia grad, Georgia alumnus, letterman at UGA, went on the Paul Feinbaum show. And this is one of those things that it's hard to even understand how something could have gone viral back in 2002. There was no social media. Paul Feinbaum wasn't doing a show on the SEC network because the SEC network didn't exist. This is like sort of low wattage AM radio in Alabama. Yet when Dye goes on the Feinbaum show and says that he doesn't think that Georgia is man enough to beat Alabama, this is like the biggest deal in the world, and it's all word of mouth. I mean, like, it's just amazing how news traveled way back in the dark ages of 2002. But it was like the biggest deal in the world. Georgia had been challenged, had been told by a guy that knew the SEC well, they weren't man enough to beat Alabama, even so much so that it was talked about in a big storyline on the CBS broadcast there that day in Tuscaloosa. This is Vern Lundquist.
Well, a lot of noise made in these parts because of a quote from former Georgia player and Auburn coach Pat Dye on a radio show earlier this week. Pat Dye said Georgia's not man enough to whip Alabama. That's exactly what I said, and that's what I think. Well, Mark Richt immediately wanted to get a transcript of the broadcast, and so a lot of locker room material for the Georgia team.
Well, he said it 3 times in the interview. He didn't just say it once. I mean, he repeated himself 3 times, and you can't make too much of it, but I think that the Georgia team has answered that call so far.
So listen, that was a huge source of motivation for Georgia back in 2002. They wanted to prove to some coach that they were man enough to go out and beat Alabama. But if you fast forward to 2020, if you told these Georgia players they weren't man enough to play in this game and beat Alabama, I'm not sure they would use that as a source of motivation, because I'm not even sure they would understand what you were talking about. If you told Azeez Ojulari he wasn't man enough to do something, I think he would assume there was something wrong with you for thinking that, more so than there was something wrong with him for having that said about him. That source of motivation just doesn't really work for this Georgia team on Saturday. They are an underdog, factually speaking, in the game. They are a point spread underdog, but they can't play the underdog role very well in this game because they aren't without their own supporters going into this. Let me give you a brief example here. CBS Sports does their weekly show on the CBS Sports Network. They got a bunch of analysts, guys like Rick Neuheisel and Randy Cross and Brian Jones. Aaron Taylor's on the show, and when they went across the board making picks this week, the idea that Georgia in 2020 not man enough to beat Alabama, the way that was kind of said and used as a source of motivation in 2002, that's nowhere to be found. Even though the dogs are the point spread dogs, so to speak, in this game on Saturday, there is plenty of reason, at least in the part of the CBS analysts, to think that Georgia can win this game this week. Let me start with Rick Neuheisel.
I'm going to say 21 and done. Kirby Smart and Georgia find a way to win this week in Tuscaloosa.
Putting the big G on the board right there. Running the football.
Running and a little bit of Stetson Bennett. Little dab behind the ears and just distribute. There's enough meat on the bone for them to do it.
So the 21 and done he's referencing is the streak that Nick Saban has had against former assistants. You hear Rick Neuheisel there say that comes to an end here this week. Also, Randy Cross, former San Francisco 49er great, he is on the side of the dogs on this particular game as well.
The last couple of times that Georgia's played Alabama, they've been right there. And I really believe that this is going to be the game where they get over the top. They not only are managed to be ahead and tie against Alabama, they managed to go to Alabama and win, which they haven't done since an overtime win in 2007. Kirby Smart and company get a win against Bama in Tuscaloosa.
And then if you want the ultimate contrast to the 2002 game in which Georgia was told flat out by Pat Dye, you're not man enough to beat Alabama, compare that to what CBS Sports analyst Brian Jones says about the Dogs before going to Tuscaloosa. This time, far different a piece of analysis here.
I'm running out of superlatives to heap upon this Georgia defense. Azeez Ojulari will not be blocked. Forget about it. No one's going to block number 13. And then they keep coming with number 4. Here comes 27. Here comes 32. This is how Bama used to be. Georgia's going to win this ballgame, I believe.
So for those of you who say, well, yeah, BA, but this is just rat poison. This is too much the other direction. I don't think this quite rises to the level of rat poison because while I gave you 3 examples of people picking Georgia to beat Alabama, it's not like the whole world's going to be on the Crimson Tide. I'm guessing you hear a little bit different piece of analysis coming on the ESPN booth from College Game Day this Saturday, which of course will be live from Tuscaloosa. But it is a reminder of this. For those of you that are familiar with, Bill Simmons is the sort of internet, former ESPN sports commentator, sports personality. He's had the belief over the course of years that the nobody believes in us card can be kind of a nice one to be able to play, an extra, source of motivation for winning games. It's nice to be the team that nobody believes in. Georgia is the underdog against Alabama on Saturday, and many would say underdog for a reason. But Georgia can't necessarily play the nobody believes in this card this week because I just gave you 3 examples of people who do believe in Georgia, and in the media this week there will be others. Ultimately, do more people pick the Tide than pick UGA? And are there more unanswered questions about the Georgia offense than there are emphatic answers regarding the Georgia defense? Maybe so, but there's at least enough out there that for Georgia on Saturday, going into Tuscaloosa, this isn't viewed as David versus Goliath. This is viewed as Clash of the Titans. This is a fair fight in the minds of the media, and in a fair fight, the only thing you can do is roll up your sleeves and go out there and try to win it, and that is exactly what Georgia's going to do on Saturday. Now, let me shift gears to this. Speaking of trying to roll up your sleeves and win a battle, Georgia's also going to try to do that today when it comes to recruiting. Big moment for the 2021 class when 5-star offensive tackle Amarius Mims will make his announcement from Bleckley County later on this afternoon. Live coverage of that on all of the DawgNation video channels. We'll get going around 3 p.m. or so. Did have a chance to check in and catch up with DawgNation's recruiting analyst, Jeff Sintel, just before our show today. I said, Jeff, set the stage for me for Amarius Mims' decision. He gave you some good news and possibly a little bit of a warning at the end. Here is Jeff Sintel on Amarius Mims.
He's told me in the past that if Sam Pittman would have stayed at Georgia, he would have already been committed to Georgia by now. So it's been Matt Luke, it's been Scott Cochran, it's been Kirby Smart. Those guys have repeatedly been contacting him, letting him know he's a priority even in a pandemic. I think the battle today comes down between Georgia and Tennessee. I think no matter what decision that Amarius Mims says today, that this recruiting decision will still go on. It won't be locked stone cold yet because all these schools will still try to recruit Amarius Mims.
So I'm sorry that audio sounds so awful. That is not the way it sounded when I recorded it. But nonetheless, you hear what Jeff Sentell says there, that the relationship between Mims and Georgia has been good for a while, that had Sam Pittman remained at Georgia, maybe it had already been locked up. But listen, when it comes to Matt Luke taking the baton from Pittman, no one can deny that Luke has been great in that regard since becoming Georgia offensive line coach, and a chance for him to get another win here today. But as Jeff warned you, be really careful about this, that the battle for Mims could extend beyond just this particular day. Sounds like Jeff is still batting down the hatches for a little bit more on the Amarius Mims front. So we'll watch what happens today, and we'll see how that storyline evolves here in the weeks to come. But either way, pivotal moment for the class of 2021. As Jeff Sentell has said at a different time, the largest recruit that Kirby Smart's ever had the opportunity to win a battle with could go down with Mims later on today. You better believe all eyes will be on Cochran, Georgia, and Bleckley County when Amarius Mims makes his decision this afternoon. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast, radio, and streaming video show covering the Georgia Bulldogs and for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Thanks so much for being with us here today. Huge thanks to our friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort for making it all possible. You know, what I love about Harris Cherokee Casino Resort is two things. First of all, they have two great locations. The original Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, also Harris Cherokee Valley River. They're both less than a 2-hour drive from Atlanta, so really easy to get there. You need a getaway probably this time of year. Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, either of their great properties, provides that opportunity for you. They've also got luxury shopping, fantastic dining, a spa experience you can really enjoy, incredible accommodations in the hotel room, all kinds of great entertainment choices there as well. And on the gaming floor right now, they've worked really hard to make social distancing, which is important to all of us right now. At Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, they take that very seriously for you there as well. That means they've sort of increased their social distancing measures because they know you want to get away, but you also want to feel healthy and safe while you're doing that. That's exactly what Harris Cherokee Casino Resort does. Also, make sure you join Caesars Rewards if you haven't done that yet. There's free play incentives for you and all kinds of stuff when you sign up there. So go to this website, please. It's Caesars.com. /Harris-Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. That'll get you in touch with Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. All right, we are very busy on our program today. I mentioned the 2002 Georgia win against Alabama a little earlier. The quarterback of that game, David Greene, going to join us later on. We'll look back on 2002 briefly with him, but a lot more on kind of what he's seen thus far from Stetson Bennett. I love position-specific scouting, and David's a guy that obviously knows the quarterback position really well. He will give us his thoughts as a quarterback on what he's seen from Stetson Bennett, the current UGA quarterback. We'll look forward to doing that with him coming up in just a couple of minutes. Mike Griffith also a couple of minutes away here as well. We'll talk more to him. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse. It's delivered today by Marco's Pizza, and one of the frustrating things that I've seen in the media a little bit this week is the notion that, hey, the SEC's not playing defense anymore. And I don't just say this as someone who likes Georgia and feels like that maybe sometimes the Georgia defense doesn't get acknowledged as much as it could. I mean, that's part of it, don't get me wrong, but that's not all of it. I think that there's this misbegotten notion on the part of the media that Alabama is the SEC, kind of the same way that Clemson is the ACC. It's sort of Clemson and everybody else in the ACC. I think some people have the incorrect opinion that the SEC is also Alabama and then everybody else. But the truth is, and I think I pointed this out on video yesterday, maybe during this show near the end of our broadcast, that Alabama's only won the SEC once out of the last 3 years. You know, the notion that Alabama and everybody else is trying to chase Alabama in the SEC, when it comes to hoisting conference championships, that hasn't necessarily been the case. And yes, right now, Alabama is not playing very good defense. I saw this stat. Can this even be true? They're giving up 30 points a game through 3 games right now. So they're not playing defense, but that doesn't mean that everybody in the SEC isn't playing defense. Georgia, as you've probably noticed, is playing a pretty high level of defense right now, in fact, to the tune of the very best in the country. But the challenge against Alabama is a major step up in weight class, a much, much tougher test for Georgia coming up on Saturday. And when Kirby Smart met with reporters a little bit after last night's practice, he did address the issue of what it means for his defense to go up against this Alabama offense, in particular Najee Harris, the running back. But that's not the only thing to be concerned about with Alabama. This is Kirby on the defense against the Tide.
It's not just Najee, though. Their offensive line is humongous. Every guy's 330, 340, and they wear on you. They lean on you. It's like Nick used to say, they got weight classes in boxing, and there's a reason. If a guy's a heavyweight and he keeps hitting a lightweight, eventually the heavyweight will knock the lightweight out. And you got to have enough big guys across the line of scrimmage to withstand that. And, we feel like we're in a much better position now than we have been in terms of depth, but we don't have guys across the defensive line as big as their offensive line. The difference is we've got to be able to substitute guys and play guys, and try to stay fresh, and try to use our depth to take those punches. And then we got to be able to give some punches by how we play.
I love that line from Kirby Smart because I think it really sums up what I felt about the Georgia defense thus far this year. Last year they were good, but I'm not quite sure how many punches they were throwing. They were great at absorbing punches from opposing offenses, but were they throwing their own punches? I would say maybe not enough. This year's defense, much more impactful, more sacks, more tackles for loss, more active in the backfield. They are capable of throwing their own punches. However, against Alabama on Saturday, one of my concerns would be because Alabama's kind of left and right-handed. They can throw, they can run with Najee Harris. You probably have to pick one thing to take away if you're Georgia, and I think attempting to limit Najee Harris is probably the best choice on that, which means you'll probably give up some stuff in the air, which means for Georgia, the definition of good defense against Alabama is probably a slightly higher scoring affair than maybe what you gave up defensively to Tennessee or what you gave up defensively to Auburn. In other words, the definition of good defense changes when you are facing a better offense, which what Alabama provides as a opposition for Georgia on Saturday. But if Georgia can step up, throw some of its punches, as Kirby Smart says, along the line of scrimmage, limit what that big offensive line is capable of doing, limit what Najee Harris is capable of doing, even if the score looks a little, bigger than what we're used to seeing the Georgia defense give up, the UGA defense can still be one of the major factors why Georgia does win, if it indeed does win this upcoming Saturday. That's Around the Doghouse. It's delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza, America's most beloved pizza because it's real, authentic pizza made the Italian way. It's also great savings right now as well. You can get a large one-topping pizza, 10 chicken wings or dippers. Right now, that's just $17.99. It's a DawgNation game day favorite for sure, and it's easy to order through the Marco's app or online at marcos.com, baked in a 450-degree oven. Then contactless, touchless, delivered right there to you. Marco's taking good care of you. Find out more about that online at marcos.com. All right, busy show for us. It's the former Georgia quarterback, David Greene, to talk about Stetson Bennett before we're done. But for now, on everything that's been happening in Athens this week, let's talk to our buddy Mike Griffith.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll say hello to Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. As I've said before, he's had his ear to the ground in Athens all week long as Georgia prepares for the Alabama Crimson Tide on Saturday. And I guess, Mike, if you don't mind, let me pick up with where I just left off a moment ago. When you think about the Georgia defense and when you think about what it's done the last couple of weeks against offenses inferior to the one they're going to see against Alabama on Saturday, and in consideration of everything that Kirby Smart has said thus far this week, how ready do you think the UGA defense is for the challenge it's about to get from Alabama coming up on Saturday?
Ready as they can be. I mean, it's a great defense. There's no doubt about it. They haven't seen an offense like Alabama's, but, they don't make the schedule. They play it, right? Arkansas wasn't any great shakes. I think we documented that Auburn's offensive line was very shaky. And Tennessee, I don't know if Tennessee really had the skill position players to exploit Georgia. So now you get a team that probably, if you put together those first three teams and made an all-star team, you'd have Alabama. This Georgia defense is really dominant, though. It's deep. It's well-coached. They make incredible halftime adjustments. I think it's a really good defense. I think they're as ready as they can be.
So I think that ready as they can be is a good way to say this, a good way to describe it. Do you agree with me that you're probably not taking away both the Alabama pass and the Alabama run? Therefore, I think you've got to make a judicious choice. I think doing everything you can to limit Najee Harris is the best way to give yourself the best chance at victory. In other words, you could shut down Mac Jones, but if Najee Harris is running wild, that's not a game that you're going to win because that feels very much the way that SEC football has always been. The team that rushes the ball better just finds a way to win. Doing something to keep Najee Harris from having a huge day, even in the high-scoring game against Ole Miss, Najee Harris was still all over the place. Doing something to limit him, being satisfied knowing that maybe Alabama gets a little bit through the air, that can be a recipe for victory, even if it's a little higher scoring game than Georgia fans are used to, the Georgia defense wants to be a part of. Taking away Najee Harris may be enough to give Georgia its best chance at victory on Saturday. I believe that. Do you?
Yeah, I think it depends on the game. It depends on if the Georgia offense is doing anything. I mean, if your offense is scoring points and you want to make Alabama one-dimensional, great. But if you're struggling to score, you got to be careful not to give up explosive plays. So, and if you don't want to give up explosive plays, then you really got to think twice about bringing too many guys near the line of scrimmage. I don't think there's one real answer, Brandon. I mean, it sounds it's such a fluid situation, and you and I sat next to each other in 2018 at that game, and how many different faces did that 2018 SEC championship game have, and how different was the first half from the second half in the 2017 national championship game? It just feels like when these teams meet, because they're so talented and so well coached, it's just a constant game of adjustments. And 1 minute it's a slugfest, and the next minute it goes electric. I think ultimately you don't want to give up big plays, but at the same time, you have to do enough to try to neutralize the Bama run, because if they're getting 4, 6, 7 on first down, that puts your defense in a really bad spot, and that ultimately leads to those explosive plays, as Todd Monken explained before the season.
So one of the things I talked about before you joined us today is that even though Georgia is a point spread underdog in this game, it's really hard to sell Georgia as a David in a David versus Goliath type matchup. This isn't 2002, and I know you know the story of Pat Dye and Man Enough. This isn't 2002 Georgia versus Alabama where anyone is saying Georgia's not man enough to win. There will be people who pick Alabama, and maybe with good reason, but the notion that Georgia's not capable of playing in a game like this, that the game is too tough for them, no one will sell that here this week. Mike, I'm almost wondering, if anything, if some of that juice isn't on the other side here. And as a Georgia fan, I don't like the idea of Alabama having extra motivation, but this is a defense that got absolutely shredded against Ole Miss a week ago. Alabama still won the game, but the the Alabama defense was a non-factor all day long. How much extra motivation do you think Alabama's trying to conjure up this week to maybe prove they are man enough after not really playing a very physical brand of football through the first 3 weeks of the season?
Yeah, they got a lot to correct, and anytime anybody scores that many points on you, it's not good. And, Nick Saban has, always had a lot of pride in his defense, even though it really hasn't been the same since Kirby Smart left. The only thing I'd say is that after playing Ole Miss, the Georgia offense is going to look like it's slow motion to Alabama. I mean, they just played the fastest, arguably most high-powered offense out there. The Senior Bowl executive director says, hey, there's 5 or 6 NFL guys on that Ole Miss offense. That quarterback, Matt Corral, maybe ultimately, certainly one of the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the country, can make every throw, stretch the field vertically, horizontally, a dynamic player. The Georgia offense is not going to look explosive compared to that. Does that help Alabama? Is their confidence wavered? They've yet to stop a tight end, really. Georgia's getting Trey McGiddy back at the right time. Psychologically, the advantage goes to Alabama because they've been here, done it, and won, and they believe in the system. If Georgia is an underdog, it's because there's still critics out there that don't think Kirby Smart can beat Nick Saban. And frankly, none of Nick Saban's assistants have beaten him. That's 9 different coaches. It's not 1, it's not 4, it's not 5. 9 different coaches have lined up. Another streak, 27 in a row over SEC East teams, 5 straight in the SEC title game. So Saban has been here, done it. I think this is probably his weakest staff. I think this is probably Kirby's best chance to date. But psychologically, I think I'd give the edge to Alabama because of what you said, that because of the chip on the shoulder defensively, and I think also because they did get lit up by Ole Miss, and because Georgia's offense doesn't move that fast and isn't that dynamic or as explosive.
Yeah, Mike, I'm a fan. Sometimes I think like a fan, and one of the things I will say as a fan is I kind of like it when the opponent that Georgia's about to play plays a really good game ahead of playing Georgia, as opposed to, maybe giving them something to really work on or giving them something to feel extra motivation about. I mean, this is not analysis. This is just fan talk. But there's a part of me that almost wishes the Alabama defense had played a little bit better on Saturday, just simply because, I do think there's probably a little bit of an extra edge to an Alabama practice this week because they want to prove that they are man enough.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. And conversely, I think there's a danger to Tennessee or to Georgia, the fact that, they've played 3 bad halves of football and gotten away with it. And I just don't think they can do that. The first half at Arkansas was lousy football. The second half at Auburn, they only scored 3 points. The first half at Tennessee was, you give them 7 points out of the game. That's not good football. I don't think you can play one half of bad or mediocre football against Alabama on this lighted stage. I don't think you can get away with that. Whereas, like you said, and Nick Saban said, you may be picking up on something Nick Saban may have, hey, he said, I kind of like it that we were in a fight. He kind of liked it that his team had to go 15 rounds with Ole Miss in that sort of game and stayed poised. And, whereas I feel like Georgia has this false sense of security because this defense keeps bailing out the offense. I mean, even against Tennessee, 2 turnovers early, and, the Georgia offense went backwards on their first 2 drives of the second half. I'm looking at, I was watching the replay the other day. They're going into the fourth quarter. Stetson Bennett's 11 of 21 passing against Tennessee. And I'm thinking to myself, does Tennessee have a better defense than Alabama? I don't know. So I'm a little concerned because I do think there's a false sense of security with this offense that, quite frankly, really hasn't had to go out and win a game yet.
Yeah, so that's the one thing I think I'll disagree with you on. I don't believe there is a false security, at least with me. I think people are realistic right now that Georgia's ceiling right now offensively is good. I don't know that it's great at the moment, really at any level of the offense, but this is just sort of who you have right now, Mike, if you're Georgia. I don't get the sense that JT Daniels is one play away from stepping in and playing for whatever reason. I don't know how healthy he is, despite the fact that Kirby Smart has cleared him. I do think the rotation at running back is going to continue. I don't have any reason to believe right now, though, anybody from this group is necessarily head and shoulders over somebody else. That may emerge over the course of the couple of weeks. In other words, I don't know that there's a savior anywhere on the sideline for the Georgia offense right now. It's good. I believe it's better than it was a year ago. I pointed out earlier this week some of the stats that seem to suggest that. But in terms of needing great offense to beat Alabama on Saturday, if that's the case, Georgia's probably in trouble. At least on this show, I don't know that there is much of a false sense of security about the Georgia offense. It is good right now, but it's probably far from great.
I think that's fair to say when you consider they've played Arkansas, a bad Auburn, and Tennessee. I don't think we've really seen a good litmus test yet. And again, the offense hasn't had to do much. I don't know about one player being a savior. I do like what Todd Monken's done. I think he's a tremendous play caller. I like his schemes, the air raid principles. A lot of guys running space. Harris Jackson has found space. Done, I think, a great job. He got 30 catches on 37 targets. You'd like to see George Pickens have more than 8 touches through 3 games, but, teams are paying attention to George, and that's what's opening a lot up underneath. It'll be interesting to see if Alabama tries to put Surtain on George and maybe drop a safety into the box and see what Georgia really has. So far nobody's really tested the Georgia offense to the extent that I think Alabama probably will, because Alabama would want to get into a shooting match. They'd want to say, go ahead, we're going to challenge you to make some big plays because they think they've got some big plays in them, and they do. And that's the scary part of having an offense that's not explosive is that, you can play great defense for 3 quarters, but if you're slugging along with field goals instead of touchdowns, you can see Georgia's kicked a lot of field goals, BA, a lot. And it's good you've got a good kicker in Ponlesny, but, you've kicked a lot more field goals than Alabama. Alabama's finishing drives with touchdowns, and it's going to be intriguing. It's going to happen at the line of scrimmage. Can Georgia get a pass rush without the blitz? If they can, then I think that they can neutralize Alabama's offense and keep them down around that 21-24 number. Conversely, can Georgia run the ball against Alabama with success? If they can do that and set up that play-action game, then I think they've got a chance to score some points in the 20s. But there's a lot of questions in this game going in, and I think Georgia's offense is evolving. I don't think there's a savior, but I think it's evolving. I don't think we're where it's going to be yet. Kirby kind of suggested that yesterday, that they're growing before our eyes. Kind of Riley has a good story up on that. And I think even the head coach knows this offense isn't where it needs to be to win a championship.
Yeah, I think that's all really true and really fair, Mike. I think it's really well said. I look forward to reading a bunch from you at DawgNation.com in the next couple of days. We'll catch up here on Cover 4 Live later on this week. And just thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort.
Great week, BA. I appreciate it, man. Have a good one.
Good stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good there on the Georgia offense. And, you know, Mike and I probably kind of approach this from a slightly different perspective, at least on some of the stuff that I think I've heard him say over the course of the last few days. I think his take on the Georgia offense is a little bit different than mine, but most of what he said right there, I've really got no, nits to pick really whatsoever. The one thing that I do think is a little different, though, is that, Auburn doesn't look great right now, but this is still a quality opponent. Tennessee obviously got blown out by Georgia on Saturday. It is still a quality opponent. What Bennett has done over the last 2 weeks, and what I'll call quality opponents, Auburn was ranked in the top 10 when Georgia played. Tennessee was ranked in the top 15 when Georgia played them. That should give you some confidence that Bennett can grow into a nice role for Georgia. Is he ready to go on the road and win at Tuscaloosa? Well, most quarterbacks haven't been ready for that. That is a stiff test for Stetson Bennett and everybody else. I will say, though, that the evaluation of Bennett is ongoing beyond just what happens against Tuscaloosa. And that's not me waving the white flag before the game begins. It's simply to say that a lot of the teams that are giving up 40 points a game in the SEC right now, Georgia hasn't played those teams yet. They get to play a lot of those teams in the second half of the season, assuming they get the coronavirus stuff cleared up. And so, what you think of the Georgia offense, and I think that Mike's spot on when he says that the evolution under Todd Monken is continuing. I haven't had one problem with the Todd Monken game plan element as of yet. It's been all really good, and I think that, as I said before, measurably better for Georgia against SEC foes than it was certainly in the month of November last year. So I don't yet know if the Georgia offense is going to be good enough to beat Alabama. I might have to see that with my own eyes to believe that. But is it growing into an offense that's good enough to beat anybody else right now? Yeah, it is. And it's got an entire second half of the season to continue to kind of grow into all that, too. I think that's all really important to keep in mind. Let me also just briefly mention my friends at Kroger here for a moment. The Kroger Ultimate Fan Contest continues at DawgNation.com. Someone's going to win a $500 gift card. We're going to give away like 50 of these DawgNation branded Kroger masks as well, with the really cool DawgNation moments on the front there. Just go to DawgNation.com. You can find out a lot more details about that. And we've got David Greene here coming up in just a couple of minutes. Let me do something serious here for a moment, and I'm going to try to keep this just to the facts here for a little bit, and then I'll obviously have some thoughts and analysis on this too. Let me just read from ESPN.com. Just 4 days before they're scheduled to play LSU, the number 10 Florida Gators have put football activities on hold due to a coronavirus outbreak. So what ESPN is reporting, and I guess this was originally reported by the Florida Student newspaper, 19 positive tests over the course of the last couple of days. So that's what's going on. Florida has pushed pause, and I guess we'll wait and kind of find out what impact this has on the scheduled Florida LSU game. Obviously, Vanderbilt, Missouri, supposed to take place this weekend, is not going to take place, and all eyes on Gainesville for what's going on here right there. I realize that, at times I'm not the wokest person when it comes to like coronavirus stuff. I do realize that. But even someone like me understands the importance of when you've got 19 positive tests, it is really, really critical that you kind of find out where this ends. Because if you don't get a handle on the contact tracing with these guys as close together as they are, that has the tendency to kind of turn into sort of a much bigger issue. And, controlling the spread in kind of a closed environment like this is obviously really important. Even, an idiot like me kind of understands all of that. However, if we stipulate for a moment that they can determine who has it, who's come in contact with those people, and this is who needs to be isolated. The one thing I'm going to emphatically say, although I'm not quite so sure it's actually going to happen, I'm going to emphatically say that if Florida's got the requisite scholarship players, but they're just missing some, I think the game against LSU on Saturday has still got to be played. And we saw this, in Major League Baseball when they had their plan for what to do in the event of positive coronavirus tests. They had their taxi squad and everything else, but ultimately the guys just didn't, the teams just didn't want to play those games, either because, maybe on one hand they were worried about more coronavirus spread, maybe on the other they were worried about putting something out there that looked far below the Major League standard. I think you see some of this in football too, where there are a couple of games this year that got postponed that I think could have and should have been played. The coaches just didn't like the notion of playing the game with less than full personnel. So this is something to watch here. Assuming that the spread of the virus has been kind of quelled here, and we know who's tested positive, and we know who's come in contact with them. If Florida's got the SEC mandated 53 scholarship players, if they've got a quarterback, if they've got a center, if they've got 7 offensive linemen and 4 defensive linemen, then I think the game needs to be played. We will make that your SEC through. I was going to talk more about these Georgia defense, I should say the SEC defenses against the rest of the league, what some of the media said about that. I'm going to put that off and hold that off for tomorrow because I want to get ready to speak to David Greene, the former Georgia quarterback. And part of what we're going to get into with David when he joins us here is I thought the other day John Stinchcomb, David's good friend and former teammate, had a nice compliment for David in terms of how Stetson Bennett kind of reminds him a little bit of him. So we'll talk about that and a lot more with David Greene. In fact, we have David Greene ready to go here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. So let me say welcome back, David, to the program. It's certainly great to have you again. Been a while since we've got a chance to talk to you, but I know you've been enjoying the Georgia season, and it's fun to get a chance to chat with you about it here today.
Yeah, Brandon, good to be on, buddy. Yeah, no, I tell you what, I know we've all been dying for football. We got a little taste of it early on with the ACC. Now we got our dogs playing, and I tell you what a fun team this is at Georgia. I know you and I texted a little bit last week, just excited to see this group and energy they got and the way they love to play football and go out and make plays. It's been fun to see so far.
I think one of the fun storylines about all this, too, is what Stetson Bennett has been able to do. This is kind of a story where a lot of people wouldn't expect him to be the Georgia starting quarterback, and yet I don't know that anyone can have any kind of complaints about the way that he's played thus far. As a quarterback yourself, what have you seen from Bennett thus far this season?
Well, the thing that I like about Stetson, and I've never seen him play, up until the Arkansas game. I had read some stuff, that national championship year when he was running the scout team, and you heard the defensive guys and Roquan, talk about, hey, man, Stetson's the man, and he can make plays and do all that kind of deal. But the one thing that he brings to the table is this confidence about it. And you could see it in Arkansas. When he stepped in a game, he very much had the body language like, guys, I got this. And that really settled the team down because you could tell not only when he stepped in did the offense start moving, the whole team gained confidence from, I think, him being out there. So, and you can tell by watching some of the other players that have emerged. I mean, Darius Jackson is a guy that I think Georgia fans have been excited to see what he could do, but we really hadn't seen him be able to step up, and he's really kind of emerging to be one of our top wideouts. And I think Stetson has just been a guy that just kind of gives the whole team confidence that, we got the trigger man that is at least believes that he is the guy and can make the plays.
So I know you're a modest guy. I don't mean to embarrass you, but the other day we're talking about Stetson Bennett to John Stinchcomb, of course, good friend of yours, former teammate, and he said that one of the things that Stetson Bennett reminded him of was you. You mentioned the confidence that Bennett has. John said when you played as a redshirt freshman that you didn't let the moment be too big for you. You obviously had some very successful moments there earlier in your Georgia career, but you kind of kept it all in stride. And I guess the one thing I asked John then, I'll ask you now, I see Bennett seemingly very confident, like not overwhelmed by any of this, even though it's obviously kind of a fairy tale story thus far. How does a quarterback develop that? I watched your career. I would say that it seems like you had that too. How does a quarterback keep his head about him, even though it's national television and it's lots of attention? How do you do that if you're Stetson Bennett?
Well, I think he's developed this mentality that's worked for him. Every player, and it's such a mental game as is, and he's developed this mentality where he's like, look, man, I'm going to play within myself, and he's already proved to himself that he can go out there, win, and make plays. If he views himself as, hey, I'm just a kid from Blackshear, and I can't believe I've just passed all these guys in the lineup, and I can't screw up, or if I screw up here, then I'm not going to get the opportunity to give. If you go down that road, you're going to totally tank. And I think he's realized and he's developed this process in his own mind that, look, man, I've got to fight and scratch and and if I love to play the game of football, I got to continue to just go out there, play within myself, put us in the right position where we can be successful offensively. And if I do that, my goodness, I may actually get a chance to play and be successful. And so he's done that so far, and he hasn't deviated from it. And you can tell in his post-game press conference, everybody wants to kind of harp on the Cinderella story, and he's like, yeah, but I got to do better on third down.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're trying to go there, and I'm glad he's not, because if he starts going and zooming out and start looking at the big picture, we're not going to get near the amount of production that we've been getting from him. He's a kid that's competing, playing hard, and trying to lead this football team, and you can absolutely tell that the moment has not been too big for him, because when he's been in a position where we've needed him to make a bigger play on third down or whatnot, he certainly has stepped up and made those plays.
So as far as one of those areas where there's maybe some room for improvement, one of the things that comes up a little bit, in fact, it's already come up on the show today, is, hey, it'd be nice to get George Pickens the ball a little bit more. He's obviously, at least to the eyes, maybe Georgia's most talented receiver. When you played in 2002, you had Terrence Edwards. That's the only Georgia receiver that's ever had 1,000 yards in a season. So clearly you found a way to get the ball to him over and over again. You also had deep receivers that year too, guys like Damian Gary, Fred Gibson, and others. But you still found a way to get Edwards the ball back then. How tough do you think it is for Georgia to get the ball to Pickens when every defense is trying to take it away from them? And I guess, how do you make sure that you still find opportunities for your top receiver?
Well, it is difficult because, look, even though Terrence had 1,000 yards back in 2002, we never once lined up or we never once called a play and said, we're throwing this to Terrence no matter what. At the end of the day, Coach calls play, and look, we may be trying to get the ball to Pickens, or my day it was Terrence. He may have been number one read, but if the defense takes it away, you have to go elsewhere. There's just no way to jam it in there. There's too many other good players. So the best way to get George Pickens the ball is for other receivers to continue to step up and make plays. And I think the more success we have in a running game, and the more that people continue to respect that. There's going to be teams that are going to line up and try to play man coverage, and if that's the situation, George will certainly have his shots. But look, as a Georgia fan, what I would say is, we got the thing that I love to see is we have other guys stepping up, because when George Pickens has 10 catches and nobody else has any, that's a disaster long term, because when you play these better teams, they will be able to take that guy away, and you got to have other guys that have confidence that they can step up, and make those big plays.
No, I think that's exactly right. Let me finish with this really quickly. We talked off the top of the show about the 2002 game, the game that was famous for the man enough challenge that Pat Dye issued. You were the quarterback in that game. Really, Georgia hasn't been to Tuscaloosa a whole lot. That was one of the more recent visits, and obviously a Georgia win. What do you remember about the game in Alabama in 2002, other than the fact it was excruciatingly hot?
Yeah, it was extremely hot. I remember it being a very tough physical football game. I know we started hot. I think we scored pretty early, and it was down the stretch. I just remember we executed kind of perfectly late in that fourth quarter. We had to get in the field goal range, and we drove the ball down, and then Billy Bennett hit the game winner, 26-24. I do remember Fred Gibson. We had to go route to Fred.
Mm-hmm.
I threw it short a little bit, and he just caught it literally like off his shoe tops. I don't even know how he bent down the way he bent for the football. But just a tremendous atmosphere. That obviously there were fans at that game, but it was just we were undefeated at times. They were undefeated at that time, and to be able to play in that game in Tuscaloosa was pretty awesome.
Well, David, I tell you what, I love going back and looking at those memories with you, and I certainly appreciate your analysis of Stetson Bennett here today, too. It's really great to get a chance to talk to you. I hope you've been doing well. It sounds like you've been enjoying the season, and we'll certainly look forward to hopefully getting a chance to speak to you again here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort very soon again.
Sounds good, Brandon. Appreciate you, buddy.
Good to talk to you. Yeah, really good stuff from David Greene, man. I love when you can bring on a guy who played the position at a high level to evaluate someone who's currently playing that position. There's just incredible value to that. Let me also mention this real quick, and this is, boy, talking about, an awkward transition here on a much more serious note. Have not mentioned the situation with Tommy Bush yet on the show. I was kind of hesitant to bring this up because I just wasn't really sure, how serious this was and kind of what exactly has gone on. There's been more reporting. I guess the rival site UGA Sports was the first to mention that Bush had been, I guess, bumped by a vehicle. Athens Banner-Herald has had some more reporting on that since then. Sounds like Bush has lost some teeth. I know Kirby Smart spoke about this both on Monday and Tuesday. Obviously, prayers go out to Bush and his family for a speedy recovery. What a scary situation. Awkward transition now back to a Gator Hater updater. Let's give you that number here, 1,446 days. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. All right, folks, that was a busy show. That was a lot of stuff, and we are glad to have you with us for all of it. R.S. Andrews cool down time. Actually, let me make sure I say. People will be mad if I don't say this. And on video. Time now for R.S. Andrews cool down. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. Good to have all of you with us. A part of the broadcast here today. I'll see you back this afternoon for the Amarius Mims announcement when that goes down. So just a full day here around Dog Nation, and a big thanks to R.S. Andrews making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. If your water heater goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace that for you the same day. We talk about air conditionings a lot with them. It's one of the reasons why we do the cool down, because R.S. Andrews likes to cool things down. Beyond that, you've also got air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric, lots of reasons to trust R.S. Andrews. Find them online at rsandrews.com. The good news is I've got a couple of minutes. Then after that, I've got to be off the air because we have got a lot going on, including, by the way, don't forget to check out later on this week, Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews, as Dari and the rest of the Dog Nation team make our picks for the upcoming week. But for now, I've got a few minutes for your comments. Then I have to get off the air a little early because they're going to make me do a meeting today. Every now and then I have to do some real work, and today is one of those days where I've got to show myself in a meeting. So let me talk to you, which is what I'd rather do, and then I'll be on my way for a meeting after that. All right, on Facebook first, because I'm pretty sure I started on YouTube yesterday. On Facebook first here for today. Bart Brinkley says we need to run the ball. Yeah, that's got to be a recipe for any Georgia win. Big yards in the ground for sure. Petey Wheatstraw with a very funny comparison. David Johnson, thanks to you. Good to see you. R. Edward Moore says, beat Alabama. I love the idea of that. Drew Odom says it's going to be white on silver or white on red. If I had to guess, it's white on silver, which if you want to can be considered a throwback uniform to the last time Georgia played and won there. Chad Thomas Black says, I think we'll see Bama in the SEC championship game. Do you think we'll split those games? Well, I'm obviously hoping that Georgia wins them both. I think one of the things that can be said about this game coming up on Saturday is, on the one hand, it might feel like a tune-up for the real game that comes up in December. But on the other hand, if you just make an objective comparison, it's much harder to win this game than it should be to win the neutral site game in Atlanta. Therefore, from a resume standpoint, what Georgia has a chance to prove on Saturday is really quite valuable. So there's a weird – I don't want to get lost in the weeds on this because this is probably not all that interesting. But in the NFL, where you commonly have rematches, division teams play each other twice every single year, and in the playoffs, it's possible to play a team for a third time. That happens in the NFL fairly frequently. There's a statistical phenomenon that's almost the exact opposite of what you think it is. In other words, people would say it's hard to beat the same team, or they say it's hard to beat the same team 3 times in a year. But the truth is, for the team that wins twice, they are far more likely to win that third time, even though sometimes statistically that would seem to be opposite. And when it comes to the first game, the team that wins that, they are sort of far more likely to lose the second time. College basketball kind of is the same thing from a statistical standpoint, that the losing team in a rematch has a way of being a pretty profitable pick in the second go-around. That's just kind of the way that things go. So what does that mean for Georgia, Alabama on Saturday? That, hey, what do you want to do in game 1 in comparison to game 2? Honestly, I think you just sort of buckle your chin strap and sort of hope for the best. Kevin Mills on the subject of Channing Tindall, who certainly looked pretty impressive in the second half of the game against Tennessee on Saturday. Robert Barnes says, how about you win now and worry about the game later when it comes? That's probably pretty fair advice. Travis McCullough says Bama's offense is not as explosive as it was last year. I would say that on paper, I would take the 2018 offense over this Alabama offense as well. Now, that doesn't mean it's not plenty of explosive for Georgia on Saturday. It's still a formidable task. But the absence of Henry Ruggs, the absence of Jerry Jeudy, I just think objectively makes the offense less potent. And, the comparison between Tua Tagovailoa and Mac Jones is probably accurate as well. Demarius Franklin says, as per ESPN, the Dogs have the most talented team. Now's the time to prove it on Saturday. We also frequently cite Bud Elliott's blue chip rating around here. And I think that Alabama was like by 1 percentage point ahead of Georgia. I think Alabama was at 79% former 4- and 5-star signees. Georgia was at 78% at the start of the season. That's essentially a fair fight. And in a fair fight, you just got to roll up your sleeves. John Bigelow says, you predicted the Dogs to beat Bama twice back in August. I think you was right. Go Dogs. I hope to be right. John, I sure hope to be right. It's a little bit different kind of Georgia team than I thought it would be back then. But, boy, I hope it's right. Chris Slim White says, why does everyone just say we're going to lose? What kind of fans are y'all? Sounds like Chris wants to hear a little bit more confidence from Dog Nation, and it's kind of nice to hear Chris say that. Epic Robinson says his favorite quote for me is, we've got to get ready to go. Okay, one more, then we've got to go. Yeah, I do that a lot. I like doing the comments. I wish I could do them all day long. I'm always very hesitant to get off the air. Hugh Nash says, I like this. Mims commits to UGA today. Dominoes begin to fall with the other recruits, and we beat Bama as the momentum builds even more. Boy, that's fun to think about from Hugh. Good stuff. Gary Holt says, do you think we're going to get some good news later on today? Yeah. I mean, my prediction for what it's worth is that Mims probably chooses Georgia. I guess I'll be pretty surprised if he doesn't. I have taken Tennessee seriously in the recruitment, but, I mean, there's so much online chatter now that seems to favor UGA. I guess I probably take that pretty seriously, but I've also kind of been wrong before. But I've got a little bit of a lean in my mind for Georgia. I do take Jeff's word seriously that maybe it's an ongoing battle even beyond today, but we shall see. Nature Gator says Florida's really good on offense and really bad on defense. And Nature, the one thing I'd add to that is, and this is just me being as honest as I know how to be, even that Florida offense, if you're going to win in the SEC and if you're going to try to mitigate against what is a deficient defense right now, I do think that Florida's got to find a way to run the ball better. I just think they have been greatly excused for only rushing for 90 yards against Texas A&M this past week. In a game in which the Florida defense couldn't do anything, a little bit more of a Florida rushing effort, I think would have probably helped there. Green Soldier says, I'm glad you got to talk to my cousin, David Greene. Obviously, David Greene has an E. Sergeant Green's name has no E. He says he spells his last name a little different, but it's good to see him. That's good to know. That's good to know. All right, let's see what else. Scott Pete says, remember our 2013 team had a great offense and a Todd Grantham defense. That's Scott, I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but that's about right. Memphis Dog says Jake Camarda is the best punter in college football. He's ready for the NFL. I do think punter probably matters on Saturday. Hopefully Georgia's not punting a lot, but if it is called upon, you want to boom it and get it out of there. P. Rich says the real question, will Kirby Smart finally prepare for the backup quarterback this time? Oh, yeah. Real Cage liked the interview with David Greene. I appreciate that. Dogfan3 says, is everyone supposed to be healthy for Saturday? Well, let's think about who everyone is. Sounds like James Cook is in a better position. That's pretty good news. Jermaine Johnson, I guess I don't really know, but I know that Jermaine Johnson's been talked about, but I'm not really quite sure where that is at the moment. Anybody else that I'm not thinking about that I should be on that? Maybe I'm JT Daniels. Your guess is literally as good as mine. I couldn't tell you within 50 miles of how healthy JT Daniels is right now. He may be healthy as a horse. He may not play until 2021. I literally have no idea at this point in time. Warren McClendon, good question. Yeah, I would watch that one a little bit. I would do that. Frank Patterson says, how about an Eric Zier interview sometime? Yeah, I love Eric. I saw Eric on Saturday for a little bit. I'd love to have him on the show. Jay Shipe says, do you see another UGA defensive shutout for at least one half of a game? If you shut out Bama's defense for a full half, you have done something. You've done something big time. Michael Porter says, thoughts on Pickens scoring one, maybe 2 touchdowns on Saturday. I do think touchdowns is the way to judge Pickens right now, and a Georgia win seems likely that Pickens would contribute with a touchdown. Georgia, it's big players who typically show up for these games against Alabama, so I would probably be paying pretty close attention to a guy like Pickens on Saturday. If you don't get that from him, you're maybe not getting what you're supposed to get, but I'd keep my eye out on that for sure. All right, I do have to go today, so let me get a couple more. Noah Sheldon says that Georgia's going to blow out Florida. I love the idea of that. Miriam Martin Corbin says, get Herschel Walker on the show. So we had a chance to talk to Herschel a couple Julys ago. That was really fun. But having him back on again would be a nice thing to do as well. Amos Williams says, Stetson Bennett's got this, and I love to see that confidence in Stetson Bennett growing. That's a fun thing to see. And after the way that he's played the last couple of weeks, how could you not feel more and more confident about what he brings to the table? All right, make sure you check out AJC.com today. Atlanta News Now at AJC.com. Game 2 of the National League Championship Series got quite interesting last night. Maybe more interesting than some Braves fans would have liked. But the good news is the Braves pull it out. They are now 2-0, and they have swept the playoffs thus far with Game 3 looming here this evening. Don't forget, we're playing straight through with the playoffs this year with no travel days in the League Championship Series. So AJC.com for more coverage on that. Falcons made another coaching move yesterday. Is it Cowitka? Is that how you say his name? The special teams coach. They jettisoned him, and easy to understand why after the debacle in Dallas. So that's ongoing. All kinds of stuff. Early voting is taking place across the state. If you want the serious news, the politics type stuff, you can get that online. Atlanta News Now at AJC.com. Just thanks for being here as a part of our R.S. Andrews School Down Today and DawgNation Daily presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. We'll try to have more time for comments tomorrow, but they are literally jerking me off the air, so I've got to go. We will talk to you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.